Sir, I need you to move to 132B. We have a family that needs to sit together, and your seat is the only one available in this section that can accommodate them, the flight attendant said with a professional but firm smile. Sergeant Thomas Ashton, 78, a veteran with a noticeable limp, looked up from his coach-class aisle seat with Ford, the one he had carefully selected months ago to give himself a little more leg room on the long flight. "But this is my assigned seat," he said quietly. "I specifically reserved it because of a service-related knee injury." The flight attendant's smile didn't waver. "I understand, sir, but we need to prioritize families. It's just for this flight." 9 minutes later, as Sergeant Ashton settled uncomfortably into the cramped middle seat in the rear, the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out. He scanned the cabin and walked directly toward him, stopping in the aisle and giving an impeccable military salute. "If you believe respect for service should never be compromised for convenience, write, 'Honor our veterans,' below." Sergeant Thomas Tom Ashton, U.S. Marine Corps, retired, had the map of his life's travels etched on his face and in the slight but persistent limp that affected his left leg, a reminder of an old-fashioned firefight in a place most people couldn't pronounce. At 78, he was thin, with carefully combed silver hair. His eyes, though dulled by age, still retained the keen powers of observation honed over decades. He was traveling from his small home in Arizona to his granddaughter's college graduation in Boston, a cross-country flight he'd been looking forward to, despite the usual discomforts of air travel. Knowing the challenges a long flight posed, on his knee, which had never fully recovered, Tom had meticulously reserved his seat months in advance. Seat 15C, an aisle seat in the comfort coach section of Transcontinental Flight 308. The few extra inches of legroom and easier access to stand and stretch weren't a luxury, but a necessity for managing chronic pain. He'd used his modest pension savings to pay extra for this specific seat, wanting to arrive on his granddaughter's special day without being crippled by the journey. He'd boarded early, according to his group, stowed his small carry-on bag, and settled into seat 15C, relieved to have the space he needed. He hoped for a leisurely flight, perhaps reading the book he'd brought. The flight was almost full. The usual pre-boarding bustle filled the cabin as passengers found their seats and stowed their luggage. Tom was distractedly watching the controlled chaos when a flight attendant, a woman in her 30s named Susan, wearing a crisp uniform and an air of hurried efficiency, approached his row. "Excuse me, sir," she said, addressing Tom directly with a polite but strained smile. "We have a family, a mother, and 2 young children who were unfortunately separated by our reservation system. They need to sit together. And your seat, 15C, along with the 2 next to you, is the only block of 3 available in this section of the cabin that can accommodate them." Tom looked up in surprise. "My seat, but I specifically selected and paid for this seat, 15C, months ago due to a medical need for legroom." Susan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I understand, sir, and we appreciate your cooperation. Sometimes these seat changes are unavoidable to accommodate families. It is airline policy to prioritize keeping families together, especially those with young children." "I appreciate the need for families to be seated together," Tom replied calmly. "But I also have a need for this specific type of seat. Is there another aisle seat available in this section? Or perhaps an upgrade given the inconvenience?" Susan looked at her tablet, tapping rapidly. "I'm afraid all the other aisle seats in comfortable economy and first class are completely full. The only seat I can offer you right now is 32B. Tom knew where 32B was, a middle seat in standard economy, probably near the restrooms at the rear of the plane, the exact opposite of what he needed. "A middle seat in the back?" she asked, her voice clearly incredulous. "That will be extremely hard on my knee on a 5-hour flight." "Sir," Susan said, her voice losing its polite tone, now tinged with impatience, as other passengers began to look around. "I really need your cooperation here. The family is waiting to be seated, and we need to close the doors for departure. It's just for this flight. We can offer you a complimentary drink voucher for your trouble. A complimentary drink voucher for giving up a carefully selected and prepaid seat, essential to your physical well-being, to be squeezed into a middle seat for 5 hours of pain. The offer seemed insulting. This isn't about a drink, young lady, Tom said, his voice still low but with a new firmness. This is about a reservation confirmed due to a medical necessity. You're telling me that airline policy requires me to aggravate a service-related injury to accommodate a booking error made by the airline. Passengers in nearby rows were now listening openly. The mother with the 2 young children stood a few rows back, looking anxious and embarrassed. Susan blushed slightly under Tom's firm gaze and the attention of the other passengers. "Sir, I'm simply trying to follow procedure and ensure that all passengers are properly accommodated. If you refuse to move, you will delay the flight for everyone." The subtle threat hung in the air. Tom recognized the pressure tactic, the implication that he was being selfish, a hindrance. He'd seen it used in different contexts for different purposes. He looked at the anxious mother, the fretting children. He didn't want to cause a scene, didn't want to delay the flight for everyone else. He didn't want to cause that family any more anguish, even if it was the airline's mistake, not his. With a deep sigh, a feeling of weary resignation settling in, Tom slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll move, but I want this on the record. My name is Thomas Ashton, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired. This is not acceptable." He picked up his small bag and began the slow, painful process of getting out of the aisle seat, his knee already protesting. Susan offered a tight, relieved smile. "Thank you for your understanding, sir." 32B in the middle. Then she turned to escort the grateful family to the row Tom had vacated. His attention was already elsewhere. Tom's sacrifice was just another problem solved in his busy day. Tom inched down the crowded aisle, wincing with each step as he dodged bags and outstretched legs. He finally reached 32B, a narrow middle seat between a burly man already crowding the armrests and a young woman engrossed in her phone. He squeezed in, his knee immediately protesting the lack of space. The flight attendant, who had directed him there, offered no further assistance or apology. He felt a familiar mix of anger, frustration, and helplessness. It wasn't just the physical discomfort, it was the casual disdain, the lack of respect, the feeling of being a nuisance. He closed, his eyes trying to control the stabbing pain in his knee. The flight hadn't even left the gate yet. As he sat there, a fellow passenger in the row ahead, a businessman who had heard the entire exchange up front, discreetly pulled out his phone. He was a frequent flyer, Diamond Delete, and had a dedicated customer service number. He quickly typed out a message. "Transcontinental Flight 308, Gate C12, elderly Marine veteran, Sergeant Thomas Ashton. Service-connected knee injury. Forced to give up aisle seat 15C in comfort economy. Prepaid for middle. Seat 32B to accommodate family. Flight attendant Susan dismissed medical need. Terrible handling, passenger visibly distressed. Suggest immediate notification to the cockpit if possible." He pressed send, hoping it would reach someone who cared more than the people at the gate. He wasn't sure if it would help, but felt he had to try something. The cockpit doors closed. The safety demonstration began. The plane backed away from the gate. Tom braced himself for a long, painful flight, his granddaughter's graduation feeling 1,000,000 miles away. 7 minutes passed, then 8. The aircraft was taxiing toward the runway, precisely 9 minutes after the cockpit door had closed. As the plane waited to enter the active runway, the cockpit door opened. This was unusual. Cockpit doors were rarely opened after pushback, unless there was a problem. The captain emerged, a man in his 50s with an imposing presence, his uniform immaculate, 4 gold stripes on his shoulder guards. He didn't head for the cockpit immediately. Instead, his eyes scanned the rows with a serious expression on his face. He briefly consulted with the chief flight attendant, not Susan, but another, more senior one, who discreetly pointed toward the rear of the plane. The captain then began walking down the aisle, his gaze scanning the passengers, stopping at row 32. His eyes found Tom, squeezed uncomfortably into the middle seat. He looked at Tom's face, noted the discomfort, the quiet resignation. The captain paused, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then it softened with what seemed to be dawning recognition and respect. He stood in the narrow aisle directly across from Tom's seat. Then, in full view of the shocked passengers in the rear cockpit, Captain David Miller, himself a former Air Force pilot, drew himself up to his full height and saluted in a crisp, formal military salute. Sergeant Thomas Ashton. The captain's voice was clear, carrying easily above the low hum of the engines. "Sir, on behalf of Transcontinental Airlines, and as a fellow veteran, please accept my deepest apologies for the completely unacceptable manner in which your seat was handled on this flight." Tom looked up in astonishment.